Title vesting. Title vesting, also referred to as tenancy. Title vesting simply refers to the method or mode of holding title to real property. Severalty. Ownership in severalty is a type of ownership, also known as a separate ownership by one individual. Concurrent estate. Joint tenancy. Tenancy in common is formed as the result of two or more persons owning an undivided interest in the property. Unity of possession is the only unity required for tenancy in common. No automatic right of survivorship. A tenant in common may bequeath his interest by will. Community property. It is assumed that when the deed designates the co-owners of the property as husband and wife that community property applies. In other words, each spouse owns 50% of the property. Section 3. Encumbrance on property. Encumbrances on property burden the property in some fashion. An example of a burden that affects and/or limits title to the property would be an easement. It is a claim, lien, charge, or liability attached to in binding real property. It will not prevent the transfer of title. An easement. Easement by prescription. Years of open, notorious, hostile, and continuous use. Confrontation with the owner is not a factor. Easement by prescription can be terminated for non-use. The easement can be terminated by the dominant tenement if they record a quitclaim deed. The dominant tenement benefits from the easement. The servient tenement is burdened by it. Just think of what the word dominant means. It means they are in control, thus they have the right to end the easement. An appurtenant easement is an easement that is annexed to the ownership of one parcel and allows the owner the use of the neighbor's land. The buyer has the same rights as the seller. Section 4. Restrictions. Police power is the authority of local, state, and federal governments to regulate the use of or to purchase private property in order to achieve planning goals is derived from the government's ability to apply certain restrictions to property and divide them into districts is zoning. Zoning is a police power. Building codes establish minimum standards in construction for the purpose of public safety. Local building codes for the most part set the highest standard of construction, but in the event of the application of minimum housing requirements and/or state and federal codes, the builder must adhere to the higher set standard. The local department. The local Department of Building and Safety is responsible for issuing building permits. Public restrictions are primarily zoning laws. Zoning laws usually utilized to promote public health and safety as well as morals and general welfare. Planning Commission is responsible for the zoning of all real properties in the locality. Changes in zoning may be initiated by property owners, developers, subdividers, or governmental agencies. A petition for variance is a method by which a landowner can try to show that unique circumstances exist and that his land should be allowed an exception to present zoning laws. Variance is done lot by lot. Downzoning refers to zoning changes that convert commercially zoned properties into one zoned for residential use. A grandfather clause allows existing use of a property that have been made non-conforming by zoning laws to continue. Private restrictions the higher standard of restrictions will usually control. For example, if deed restrictions in a subdivision required that each lot contain a minimum 15,000 square feet structure and the applicable zoning laws required that each lot contain a minimum 10,000 square foot structure, the deed restrictions would prevail. Encroaching. If a neighbor is encroaching, you would sue for trespass. For example, if the owner of a parcel of land built a driveway on his own land that accidentally crossed 2 feet over onto his neighbor's land, this would be an encroachment. Developers' responsibilities is to make sure the streets, curbs, sidewalks, utilities, and gutters are completed and functional. Section 5. Liens. Liens are charges imposed against real property to provide security for the performance of some type of act, usually to provide incentive for or satisfy payment. A common example would be taxes or a trust deed or mortgage. General liens applies to and burdens all of the owner's real property, but only in the county of recording. Examples include tax liens or liens resulting from a court judgment. Specific liens only burdens a specific parcel of the owner's property. Examples include trust deeds, mortgages, mechanics liens, or property taxes. A mechanics lien special assessments liens made against property as a way of funding specific local improvements. Street Improvement Act of 1911 assessments liens cannot be used to purchase land or to fund construction. Lis pendens is a notice of pending litigation pertaining to a property and it may affect the title. Pending the results of the litigation, the lis pendens remains in effect until either there is a judgment or the litigation is dismissed. Writ of execution is a court order to sell property to satisfy judgment. Injunctions are a court order to stop or prevent certain action by certain individual or entities. For example, an injunction could be sought by members of a subdivision of residential homes to prevent one homeowner from putting up a large neon sign over his home that says motel. Section 6. Subdivisions. A Subdivision Map Act gives certain municipalities control over subdivision design and it is enforced by the respective city or county in which it is enacted. Master Plan is generated by cities and counties in order to designate the locations of streets and freeways, seismic activity zones, and commercial, residential, and industrial districts. Subdivided Lands Act is designed to prevent fraud by setting forth certain guidelines for subdivisions. According to the Subdivided Lands Act, Minimum number of parcels for application. A condo must have a minimum of 5 or more units. Condominium. Subdivisions can be designated as commercial, residential, or industrial. Bylaws. CC&Rs must be provided by the seller of a condominium to the buyer. A copy of the condominium's bylaws, CC&Rs, and the most recent financial statement of the Homeowners Association. A buyer in a land project has 14 days to rescind his purchase. The public report must be made available to any person who requests it at any time. A subdivider must retain receipts for final public reports for 3 years. The public report does not guarantee that the property not been overpriced. If the seller of timeshares gives away gifts. If the seller of timeshares gives away gifts in exchange for attendance at a sales presentation, he must disclose this fact in an advertisement. Section 7. Title transfers. Title. Ownership. Legal title. Rights to sell. Equitable title. Right to use and possess. Trust or trustee beneficiary. Truster who gives up the title to the trustee for money. Trustee neutral person who holds the title. Attorney beneficiary who gives the money to the truster and gets the title until the truster pays back the debt. Agreement to sell. Any agreement to sell real community property is unenforceable if not signed by both spouses. A cloud on title. A quiet title action is an action by a court to remove a cloud or claim that has been placed on title to property. Alienation of title is the conveyance of title. The opposite is acquisition of title. Eminent domain is when the property is taken by the government because it is necessary for necessary public use. The owner of the private property taken receives just compensation through a process called condemnation. Eminent domain is usually not held by individuals. Inverse condemnation is when the owner sues the city to buy his property for excessive airport noise. Escheat is a reversion of property to the state in the absence of an individual owner. Usually occurs when a property owner dies intestate and without heirs. An individual cannot acquire property through escheat. Accretion is an addition to land from natural causes. Avulsion is a rapid and forceful washing away of land by water. For example, if a dam breaks and the rushing water washed away a strip of land, this would constitute a loss of title by avulsion. Probate sale is a sale of a home that occurs when a homeowner dies and the property is to be divided among inheritors or sold to pay debts. The broker's commission is set by the court in a probate sale. Intestate succession occurs when someone dies without leaving a will or leaving an invalid will so that the property of the estate passes by the laws of succession rather than by the direction of the deceased. Section 8.